Alright folks, I promised I'd come in and take a look at the comments you guys added to Essay 2 and the sample Essay 2 and give you guys a little bit of feedback. Obviously there are some things that lots of you noted in here, and then there are some things that just one or two people noted. I'm not going to go through every comment, but I'm going to try to kind of touch on some of the key things and kind of respond to the thoughts you guys had. So, first and foremost, the introduction was divisive, apparently. Some people like that they got right in, the author here got right into it. Some people didn't at all, okay? Robert noted it was straight to the point. He preferred a more intriguing start. I thought that was interesting. Sophie noted that she liked how they jumped right into it. And then there's sort of some concern about, is there a hook? Is there something? So Mun, I want to note Mun's comment here begins right away. A paragraph which arouses the reader's interest would be better. Now, what I would say about the introduction here is I think it needs a little bit more kind of to get it going, but I don't think it needs a paragraph, okay? One of the reasons it doesn't include a traditional hook as we've used them is that traditional hooks tend to be really clunky and not work all that well, okay? Traditional hooks, you guys sometimes were told to just put a quote down, to ask a question, a bunch of these things, okay? And all of them have some flaws, okay? You put a quote, well, in this case, it'd be kind of out of the ordinary. It doesn't really tie into the information we've got. If we were to have a hook or ask a question, like, have you ever wondered whether or not diet soda helps you lose weight? One of the things I always say about that is if the reader says no, they have no reason to keep reading your paper. They know that that's what you're going to talk about. They might as well just bounce right now. So, one thing I might consider, though, is to look at the thing you put on your Essay 2 proposal as why it matters. That's a good way to start an essay, actually. So we might put here, for example, well, why does this matter? Well, millions of people struggle with their weight and are trying to find some way to handle it, okay? And so maybe we're going to start the essay like that. Given the, huge sales of diet soda and people's, the fact that people are consistently struggling to lose weight in this country, it makes sense to consider whether or not, diet soda is a good choice. All right. And then we can get into the meat of this. All right. I will note, we get, straight to the point. We get the author, the source of both pieces, and their central questions introduced in that first paragraph, which I do think is really important to get your reader on board with where you're going. Okay? There are a couple comments here I wanted to touch on. Jasmine and Zoe. Jasmine notes that she likes how the essay flows. Now, I really hate the word flow because it's like this really amorphous thing. We don't really know what that means. We feel it, but we can't articulate it. I want to talk a little bit as we work our way through here about articulating why this flows a little bit. Okay. Zoe also notes that one thing that's out of the ordinary is it gives the results of the study and proceeds to explain the study versus the other way around. And I think that's a good way to think about structuring this essay. We need to actually start with what their findings were, okay? If their findings disagree with each other, we want to start from that point because our paper is then to figure out why, okay? If the findings are substantially the same between the two studies, well, maybe we would structure this a little bit differently. But certainly in the case where they are different, it makes sense to start with the findings and then kind of pose that question. Okay, so if we look at the first two body paragraphs here, what we see, Peter's research, blah, 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 and Fowler's research. Basically what we've got here is a very brief summary of each of the two studies. Now, there are a couple key things. There are a few comments here that the summary was well done here. And I do think this is super important for your essays as well. You need to be able to explain very clearly and simply to your readers what the scholars did in order to try to answer this question, how they structured that study, and what their findings were. all pretty darn quick, okay? One of the reasons I've been having you guys write annotations is it's really good practice at summarizing that information, okay? And one of the comments I make most frequently on those annotations is you need to get the specific detail here that's important. Sometimes people get stuck in the literature review. Sometimes people don't give the findings. Sometimes people don't explain how they conducted the study. Getting the details of the study and the findings together is absolutely critical here. When we think about flow, okay, there's nothing really connecting these two other than some phrases like "on the other hand," okay? So this paragraph then shows a contrast between Fowler and Peters' research in the design of the study. From there, we move on to this rhetorical question, okay? I love Marcos's comment here that whoever's reading it should be able to chill while the writer answers the question. Yeah, so one thing I want to point out here is that rhetorical questions work if they're actually rhetorical. In other words, you're sort of laying out a question that you presume the reader has, but you're not putting it on the reader. You're just asking the question, well, why the huge discrepancy? And what does this paragraph do then? It immediately goes on and answers it. What it does for you as a writer, though, and for the reader, is it primes the reader to get ready to understand why there is a difference between those two. Okay? So this sort of rhetorical question does two things. Number one, it primes your reader, gets them really ready for this. And number two, it helps that flow that Jasmine talked about, right? We've given a summary of the first piece. We did a summary identifying some contrast in the study design, and now we have to ask the question. Okay? It is, in many ways, sort of the logical way we think through things. And if the essay is structured in such a way that the reader is thinking through in the same order, they're more convinced and it's easier for them to follow, i.e., it feels like it flows. So sometimes that rhetorical question can be a really useful tactic in order to make it flow. A couple other comments that came up that I thought were interesting. Dalton identified I enjoy how throughout the essay, the author's not afraid to give credit where credit is due, will attempt to bring up both the good and the bad of a particular point. So you'll see on the surface, this is what it looks like. Again, that's also priming your reader for some contrast. We know that there's going to be something below the surface coming. Again, that helps that flow. Okay, it's about laying something out and either contrasting it, building on it, those sorts of things, okay? But also, and there's another comment back here, and these two tie together, I think. I'm going to try to find, I know it was Robert's comment. Sorry, it took me just a minute to root that up. Robert noted here that when providing comparative essay, I'm not a fan of guessing or making assumptions, okay? Now, I think one thing that's really critical to understand here is most scholarly research is not black and white. It's not like they're like, oh, we proved X is the case, okay? There's actually no proof that cigarette smoking causes lung cancer. I know it's difficult to believe, but there's no proof of this. There are very, very strong correlations, okay? And so we always couch this in terms of what we do and don't know. It is very, very likely that cigarette smoking leads to lung cancer. However, the only way we could actively prove that is to take, like, identical twins and have half of them smoke for their lives and the other half not, and then check to see who gets lung cancer most frequently, okay? Obviously, that's not ethical. We don't do it. And as a result, we'll never get, quote-unquote, proof. Okay, so you're going to see there's going to be a lot of cases where it's supposedly, or they suggest, or they claim, or there's a correlation between them. There's a relationship between them. We're going to get a lot of the language here, kind of couching it in the most accurate terms. It may not be the most satisfying for us, but it's the most accurate. And the other thing, of course, in this is the author contrasts this excellent method of testing a variable because Peters ultimately kind of jukes the results by starting with a group of test subjects that all drink diet soda. So it's actually people quitting diet soda, of course. So it's an excellent method of testing a variable if you're not intentionally, I would argue, trying to screw with the results. Okay, as we get down to the end here, again, there's some comments here about good adjectives. Again, the goal here is to try to get to the right answer, okay? Which sometimes is very nuanced, and I want you guys to think about that level of nuance as you work your way through here. Okay, again, another rhetorical question takes us into the conclusion. The paper has built a whole lot towards Peter's work being problematic because of all of these potential biases. The conclusion then, of course, tells us, well, what is the actual takeaway? What do we know about this based upon the information given? Okay? We know a few different things. We know that people who quit diet soda will actually struggle more, right? And that's what we get here, okay? Marcos notes, the body paragraphs are able to support the thesis statement. If we go back and take a look at that thesis, okay, if we go and look at what that thesis is, it's easy to see how the two studies came to different conclusion if it's not hard to know who's right. Basically, we know how they came to different conclusions. That's all it says, okay? The real meat of this, the takeaways, okay, what can we actually say about the relationship between diet soda and weight gain, all come out in the conclusion. Paper's been building to that, I think, but all that stuff comes out in the conclusion here. Okay. All right. I do think there's a learning opportunity for both sides. Sophie notes that Mud notes that his own conclusion is probably too short. This is a pretty detailed conclusion, and if you think about the way this essay is structured and the way our essay should be structured, we're really building towards the conclusion. Sometimes that conclusion might be a couple paragraphs because we are actually trying to explain what everything looks like after we've built over the course of the essay. Okay, the last thing I want to note here, there were a lot of comments about parentheses and the sentences being choppy. I think it's a totally fair criticism. I will confess, I actually wrote this essay. And I wrote it specifically to give my students a sample. When I first started teaching this, I've been teaching this essay for a few years. And I wanted to make sure they had a sample when I first started teaching it. And I hammered it out. I didn't come back and reread it. My writing, as you guys have rightly noted, is a little choppy. Again, I'm trying to, I think, paint a very nuanced picture. Try to clarify. That's what a lot of those paragraphs do. A lot of you went through and line edited some of these and said, oh, it'd be better this way and this way. And I think you guys are all right. Okay, good work on that. Your work to clarify my sentences, I think, is really good. So good work on that. I did want to point out some of the things that happened in the introduction, how the essay is structured, what was actually done there for it to flow, and then what that conclusion looks like. So again, I created this sample specifically so hoping that you guys would get out of it some of the things I want to see in the essay. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know.